And political correctness is just the opposite of that. They don't want you to have a discussion, particularly about controversial subjects. So they make those taboo while they just go ahead with their agenda and nobody talks about it. And they change the very fabric of our nation. Who would have thought 50 years ago that we would be at this stage now in our country, where we would be afraid to even talk about God in public, much less about the Word of God and what it says, and that we're willing to just put all that under the cover for the sake of political correctness. We must be stronger than that. We must be willing to stand up for what we believe in. And, you know, the PC people and the progressives, they like to create friction between people. They like for people to believe that if they don't agree with you, then they're evil people. Whatever happened to being able to engage in civil discussion? If you have a disagreement, actually talk about it rather than just call people names and act like third graders. And all we do now is create wars on people. We have a war on women, which is the most absurd thing in the world. And then you have racial wars, income wars, age wars, religious wars, you name it, there's a war on it in America. And all that's doing is dividing us. And there are people who benefit from dividing us. We, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those people who are trying to make us think that we're enemies. And we have to be smart enough to identify them and to ignore them. That is what will help to save our nation. We have the wisdom and the ability to do such things. Well, you know, there were a lot of problems along the way. My parents got divorced early on. That was a devastating thing for me. And you know, have you noticed how easily people get divorced these days? You know, there was a time when they used to say to have and to hold until death do us part. Now it's to have and to hold until you get irritated with each other. You know, and we need to make sure that our young people know before they get married that there's probably not going to be paradise, particularly in the beginning. You know, like taking two pieces of sandpaper and rubbing them together. There's a lot of friction in the beginning. But what happens if you keep rubbing the sandpaper together? Pretty soon it gets smooth. Just to stay in there long enough for it to get smooth. And it makes all the difference in the world. The family that God envisioned for us. One of the strongest pillars. You know, one of the things that Stalin and Lenin said about America, they said, America is incredibly strong. And how do we bring them down? We're not going to do that militarily. But let's look at their strength. And they said the two biggest pillars of strength that America has, their faith and their families. Have you noticed in the last few decades how much those two things have been attacked? Faith and family. And what's happened to our nation as we allow those things to be challenged and as we accept the alternatives to faith and the alternatives to the traditional family? Something to really think about at some point. But anyway, you know, my parents got divorced because my mother discovered that my father was a bigamist. And, you know, she only had a third grade education. She worked extremely hard in an attempt to keep us afloat. And we ended up moving to Boston from Detroit. And there was never any money for anything. And I remember we would go to the store, my brother and I would be asking for suckers and gum and all kinds of things that kids ask for. the answer was always the same. There's no money for that. But she wanted to buy it for us. And the painful look in her eyes was such that pretty soon we just stopped asking because we didn't want to see that look. But she worked very, very hard. And her goal was to get us back to Detroit. And after a couple of years, we were able to get back there. And I was a fifth grade student. I was a horrendous student. Probably the worst student you've ever seen in your life. Everybody called me dummy. That was my nickname. I thought I was dumb too. I remember once we were having an argument about who was the dumbest kid in the school. And it wasn't a big argument because everybody agreed it was me. But then somebody tried to extend the argument to who was the dumbest person in the world. And I said, wait a minute. I said, there are billions of people in the world. And they said, yep, and you're the dumbest one. So that wasn't a good day for me because we had a math quiz that day. And, I had a problem with math. I had a real disagreement with the math teacher who thought you should know your timetables. And as far as I was concerned, they were printed on the back of the notebook, so I could look it up if I needed it. So it didn't work so well for me. And we had a quiz that day, a math quiz, and you'd have to pass your paper to the person behind you. They would correct it, give it back to you. The teacher would call your name out loud, and you would have to report your score out loud, which is great if you got 100 or 90 or 95. Not so great if, like me, you just got a 0 and just had an argument about who was the dumbest person in the world. And I knew when I said that, they would laugh and they would say, see, we told you. So I started scheming. I said, I know what I'll do. When the teacher calls my name, I'll mumble. And she'll think I said one thing, the girl behind me will think I said something else. So when she called my name, I said, And she said, 9? You got 9 right? Oh, Benjamin, this is wonderful. I knew you could do it if you just applied yourself. Class, I want you to understand the significance of this. Benjamin has got 9 right. I had 30 questions. She was just so excited. And the girl behind me couldn't take it anymore. And she stood up and he said, none. And the kids were